In November 1859, in the frozen lands of Selbu, Norway, a child was born who would become one of the most calculating predators in American history. Brynhild P's daughter Sturst would come into the world as the youngest of 8 children in a family of farmers struggling against poverty in the Scandinavian mountains. But this is not just the story of an immigrant seeking the American dream. It is the chronicle of a mind that transformed necessity into greed, survival into predation, and home into a human slaughterhouse. Between 1884 and 1908, a seemingly peaceful farm in Leoport, Indiana, would become the scene of at least 14 confirmed murders. Some experts suggest the real number could reach 40 victims. A woman of tremendous strength and diabolical intelligence created a scheme that combined matrimonial advertisements, life insurance, and a pig farm that harbored unimaginable secrets. This is the investigation into Belle Gunness, the Black Widow, who may have cheated death itself. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this is your first time on the channel, subscribe so you don't miss any of our investigations. The Sturset family lived in conditions we would consider inhumane today, crammed into a small wooden cabin that barely protected against Norway's brutal winters. Paul Sturset, the patriarch, worked as a stonemason and tenant farmer, meaning the family lived and worked on other owners' lands in exchange for a percentage of the harvest or cash payments. The Selbu region, located 37 miles southeast of Trondheim, was known for its rocky soil and unforgiving climate. The vast majority of Norwegian lands were unsuitable for agriculture due to mountainous terrain and extreme temperatures. Families like the Sturset lived in constant struggle against hunger and cold, where each winter represented a battle for survival. Brynhild grew up observing this daily struggle. She saw how money, or the lack of it, determined who lived comfortably and who died of cold. This lesson was deeply engraved in her young mind, planting the seeds of an obsession that would define her entire future existence. At 14, when most girls of her era were learning domestic skills, Brynhild already demonstrated extraordinary physical strength. She could milk cows faster than grown men and carry hay bundles that required 2 workers. Her stature was beginning to stand out. She was taller than her brothers and possessed a robust bone structure that suggested she would become an imposing woman. What truly set Brynhild apart was her supernatural strength. Neighbors would later recall watching in amazement as the teenage girl single-handedly moved a 300 lb piano from one room to another, a task that typically required 4 grown men. Her hands, already enormous and heavily calloused from farm work, could grip and lift objects that defied her age and gender. Local farmers began hiring her specifically for tasks that their own sons couldn't handle. For 7 years, Brynhild worked tirelessly on neighboring farms, economizing every penny earned. Her employers were impressed not only by her strength, but by her cold and calculated efficiency. She could carry 100 lulby pigs under each arm as if they were sacks of grain, walking steadily across muddy farmyards without showing any sign of strain. Brynhild never wasted movements, never complained about working conditions, and always negotiated her payments with a determination that bordered on intimidation. There exists a dark legend about her teenage years that, although not historically proven, reveals much about people's perception of her character. According to this story, at 17, Brynhild allegedly became pregnant by the son of a wealthy landowner. The young man, belonging to an influential family in the region, refused to take responsibility, claiming that a peasant like her was not suitable for marriage. The story tells that Brynhild attended a community dance where she was brutally assaulted by the young man, who allegedly kicked her belly, causing a spontaneous abortion. The aggressor was never punished due to his privileged social position. True or not, this narrative gained strength when a few months later the young man died of stomach cancer, a coincidence that many in the community considered too suspicious to ignore. In 1881, at 22 years old, Brynhild had finally saved enough money for passage to America. At the Castle Garden Immigration Station in New York, she made her first conscious reinvention. When the officer asked her name, she answered Belle without hesitation, a name that sounded American, accessible, even delicate. Arriving in Chicago, Belle reunited with her sister, Nellie, who had immigrated years earlier and married John Lenn. The city's Nordic community was united and welcoming, but Belle quickly demonstrated that her interest went beyond ethnic solidarity. During community meetings, she observed which families had more resources, which men seemed prosperous, and which businesses were flourishing. Initially working as a domestic servant, Belle soon found a job that better suited her physical abilities, cutting animal carcasses in a butcher shop. The work was brutal and repugnant for most women of the era, but Belle demonstrated a natural aptitude for dismemberment. She quickly learned where to cut to separate joints, how to use different knives for different types of meat, and how to work efficiently, even with heavy carcasses. Her co-workers, all men, initially mocked the presence of a woman in the butcher shop, but Belle quickly proved she could work faster and with more precision than many of them. Her concentration during the bloodiest work was unnaturally cold. She would hum softly while dismembering carcasses, showing no emotion as blood splattered. Her apron, this disturbing calmness, made even veteran butchers feel uncomfortable. It was in this environment that Belle met Mads Ditlev Anton Sorensen, a Danish store guard who frequented the butcher shop to buy meat for his boarding house. Mads was conservative, hard-working, and eager to start a family, exactly the type of man Belle knew how to manipulate. Belle began courting him with calculated patience. She prepared special meals with the best cuts of meat, showed interest in his stories about Denmark, and gradually presented herself as the ideal wife for an ambitious immigrant. Mads, lonely and eager for companionship, quickly fell in love with a strong and determined woman. The marriage in 1884 marked the official beginning of Belle Gunness's criminal career. Although no one could imagine the scale of horror that was to come, the Sorensen couple's first venture was a confectionery in the heart of Chicago, a city teeming with over 1 million inhabitants in the late 19th century. Industrialization had transformed sugar production, making it cheaper and more accessible than ever. Belle and Mads invested all their savings in the small establishment, buying state-of-the-art equipment to make caramels, chocolates, and crystallized candies. But Belle quickly discovered that her intimidating appearance and permanently scowling expression had a devastating effect on business. At 6 feet tall and weighing 200 lbs, she was taller than the average Norwegian man of the era, who measured only 5'5". The children, who should have been her main customers, fled in terror when she approached the counter. Mothers avoided entering the store when they saw Belle through the window. The few customers who ventured inside reported an inexplicable feeling of discomfort. Belle watched them with disturbing intensity, as if she were evaluating not their interest in sweets, but some more sinister value. Her enormous calloused hands, hands that could crush a man's windpipe as easily as kneading dough, gestured toward the candy displays with movements that seemed more threatening than welcoming. Children cried when she approached, and adults felt compelled to make their purchases quickly and leave. During the first months, sales plummeted. The couple was losing money rapidly, and Belle watched their savings evaporate with growing frustration. It was then that fate, or something more sinister, intervened. On an autumn night in 1885, a mysterious fire completely consumed the confectionery. Belle demonstrated impressive calm in the face of tragedy. While Mads wept over the loss of his dreams and investments, she was already mentally calculating the value of the insurance compensation. Her first question to investigators was not about the causes of the fire, but about when they could expect to receive the policy payment. The fire investigation was superficial by current standards. Investigators found evidence that the fire had started at multiple points simultaneously, but could not prove malicious intent. Belle provided a solid alibi and demonstrated surprisingly detailed knowledge about policies and compensation procedures. With the insurance money, the couple bought a house in Austin, Illinois. Less than 2 years later, the house also caught fire under equally mysterious circumstances. Again, Belle demonstrated supernatural calm in the face of loss and again collected substantial compensation. During this period, the question of the couple's children remains shrouded in mystery. 1900 census records indicate that Belle gave birth to 4 children: Caroline, Axel, Myrtle, and Lucy. The couple also adopted a 10-year-old girl named Jenny Olson. What makes this information deeply disturbing is that neighbors constantly commented about Belle having babies without ever appearing pregnant. Neighborhood women reported never seeing Belle demonstrate physical signs of pregnancy. The children appeared in the Sorensen house suddenly and inexplicably. Neighbors reported that Belle would leave home in the morning without children and return at night with a baby, claiming she had given birth during the day. Caroline and Axel, the 2 oldest children, died as infants from acute colitis, an intestinal inflammation that causes intense abdominal pain, nausea, fever, and diarrhea. The symptoms described by the doctors who treated the children were consistent with strychnine poisoning, but at the time, this connection was not established. Both children had substantial life insurance policies, and Belle collected the compensations with characteristic efficiency. But it was on July 30th, 1900, that Belle executed her most audacious move. Mads possessed 2 life insurance policies that, by a coincidence of contractual dates, were both active on the same day, one expiring at midnight and another taking effect at the same moment. If he died on that specific day, Belle would receive payment from both policies, totaling $8,500, and that's exactly what happened. According to Belle, Mads came home from work complaining of an intense headache. As a devoted wife, she offered him quinine powder, a common remedy for headaches at the time, before aspirin became popular. When she returned to check on his condition 2 hours later, Mads was dead. His body showed extreme muscular rigidity, with hands closed in fists so tight that considerable force was needed to open them. His face was contorted in an expression of agony, and there was dried foam around his mouth, symptoms that the first doctor to examine the body immediately recognized as strychnine poisoning. Strychnine was a common poison at the time, used mainly to kill rats and other rodents. It was easily obtained from pharmacies and agricultural supply stores, and its white powder appearance made it easy to disguise in food or drinks. Strychnine poisoning caused violent convulsions, extreme muscular rigidity, and death by asphyxiation, when respiratory muscles contracted permanently. But the family doctor, Dr. Miller, who had been treating Mads for several months for a supposed enlarged heart, arrived shortly after and contested the initial diagnosis. He declared that Mads had died of heart failure related to his pre-existing condition. Mads's family did not accept this explanation. They knew the man intimately. He was healthy, strong, a tireless worker. At 40 years old, he demonstrated physical vigor that younger men envied. Even more suspicious was Belle's behavior after the death. At the funeral, witnesses reported that Belle cried without tears, emitting sounds of lament that seemed theatrical and rehearsed. Even more disturbing, Belle went to the bank the day after the funeral to claim the insurance money. She arrived with all necessary documentation already organized, demonstrating detailed knowledge about procedures that a grieving widow should not possess. Mads's family demanded a more thorough investigation. They hired a lawyer and formally requested that the body be exhumed for autopsy. But for reasons that remain obscure to this day, the exhumation never happened. All attempts to examine Matz's body were blocked, and the case was officially closed as a natural death. Belle collected $8,500 and immediately began planning her next move. With the insurance money, she bought an isolated farm on the outskirts of LaPorte, Indiana, 120 acres of agricultural land surrounded by dense forests, with the nearest house more than a mile away. The LaPorte farm was perfect for Belle's purposes. A large 6-bedroom house, a spacious kitchen with an industrial stove, a spacious basement with a dirt floor and high beams, and a well-structured pig pen. The region was inhabited mainly by Nordic immigrants who maintained a respectful distance from each other and rarely asked questions about neighbors' business. In 1902, Belle reconnected with Peter Gunness, a Norwegian butcher who had recently been widowed. Peter had 2 young daughters, Swanhild, 5 years old, and a baby, and managed a pig farm near Belle's property. What attracted her to him was not just his stable financial situation, but his very specific professional skills. Peter Gunness was a master of his dark craft. As an experienced butcher, he knew animal anatomy better than many doctors knew human anatomy. He knew exactly where to cut to separate limbs with maximum efficiency, how to drain blood completely to prevent deterioration, and which tools to use for different types of dismemberment. Most importantly, he possessed a complete set of knives, saws, and other specialized instruments. Belle began courting him with calculated patience, preparing elaborate meals and showing genuine interest in his butchering techniques. During their courtship, she made a disturbing discovery about the pigs on Peter's farm. She watched in fascination as the animals consumed everything thrown to them. Bones, gristle, even teeth disappeared completely. This revelation would later prove invaluable to her criminal operations. The marriage took place on April 1, 1902. A week later, Peter's baby daughter died under unclear circumstances while alone with Belle. Belle explained that the child had started crying inconsolably and then stopped breathing suddenly. The death was attributed to sudden infant death syndrome. The tragedy deeply saddened Peter, but he completely trusted his new wife. During the following months, Belle absorbed every detail of Peter's professional knowledge with an intensity he interpreted as loving interest in his work. She spent hours watching him process pig carcasses, asking detailed questions about specific techniques. Peter taught everything he knew with enthusiasm, impressed by the speed with which Belle assimilated complex information. Belle learned that different animals require different techniques due to variations in bone structure and muscle distribution. She discovered that temperature affected muscle rigidity and that certain tools left characteristic marks that could be identified by experienced investigators. Most importantly, she learned how to work quickly to minimize exposure time during the dismemberment process. Peter was impressed by Belle's exceptional physical strength for handling heavy carcasses. She could carry pig quarters that normally required 2 men, and her concentration during the bloodiest work never wavered. What disturbed him, though he never mentioned it, was how Belle would hum softly while working with the carcasses, showing the same cold efficiency she had demonstrated in the Chicago butcher shop. In December 1902, Peter Gunness died in a bizarre accident. According to Belle, Peter was trying to get something from a high kitchen shelf when a heavy meat grinder fell on his head, crushing his skull. The initial version of the story also mentioned boiling water, but Belle later changed the details, an inconsistency that immediately raised suspicions. What made the death even more suspicious was the disturbing comment from adopted daughter, Jenny Olson. The 14-year-old girl told a classmate, "Mama killed Papa. She hit him with a cleaver and he died, but don't tell anyone." When called to testify before the coroner's jury, Jenny denied saying this, but her retraction seemed rehearsed and forced. The coroner examined Peter's body and found wounds that were not consistent with a falling meat grinder. There were multiple skull fractures, suggesting repeated blows with a heavy object, and the distribution of wounds indicated that Peter had tried to defend himself. The coroner officially declared that Peter had been murdered, but no formal investigation was opened due to a lack of physical evidence. Belle collected $3,000 from Peter's life insurance. More importantly, she had acquired specialized knowledge in dismemberment that would prove invaluable in the years to come. Shortly after Peter's death, Belle solved the problem of Jenny Olson. She informed neighbors that she had sent the girl to a finishing school in Los Angeles. Jenny simply disappeared, and Belle demonstrated the same supernatural calm she had shown after other convenient deaths. Peter's brother, Gus Gunness, did not trust Belle and managed to take Swanhild, the surviving 5-year-old daughter, to live with him in Wisconsin. It was a decision that saved the child's life. In May 1903, Belle gave birth to Philip, her son with Peter. Now she possessed an isolated farm, specialized knowledge in dismemberment, and growing confidence in her ability to commit murders without consequences. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the unfolding of this disturbing investigation. In 1905, Belle Gunness began the most systematic and lucrative phase of her criminal career. She had perfected her manipulation techniques and found the perfect location for her activities. Now she just needed an efficient method to attract victims. The solution came in the form of matrimonial advertisements published in Norwegian-language newspapers throughout the American Midwest. Belle created a carefully crafted persona. Attractive widow, owner of large farm in one of the best districts of LaPorte County, Indiana, wishes to meet equally well-provided gentlemen with a view to joining fortunes. No replies by letter will be considered, unless the sender is willing to follow the response with a personal visit. Adventurers need not apply. Belle received up to 10 letters a day from interested suitors. She developed an elaborate system to evaluate each correspondent, categorizing them by potential wealth, family connections, and likelihood of being searched for if they disappeared. Single men or widowers without close family received priority, especially those who mentioned having recently sold properties or businesses. Before committing to murder, Belle perfected her methods through experimentation. She tested different doses of strychnine on farm animals, carefully observing the effects and timing. She discovered that smaller doses prolonged agony, while larger doses killed quickly, knowledge she would later use to torture information about hidden money from her victims. In 1907, Belle hired Ray Lamphere as a farm worker. Ray was a man of questionable reputation, known for drinking too much, gambling compulsively, and having tumultuous relationships with women. Belle quickly initiated a sexual relationship with him, using physical intimacy to ensure his loyalty and silence. Ray fell deeply in love with Belle, but gradually became more than an employee. Belle involved him in aspects of her criminal operation. Initially, he only dug holes that Belle claimed were for garbage. Later, he began helping move heavy equipment during the night. Eventually, Ray was helping bury bodies, although Belle always claimed they were dead animals. During this period, Belle was ordering enormous trunks to be delivered to her residence. The delivery driver, Clyde Sturgis, was impressed by Belle's physical strength. According to him, she picked up those enormous wooden trunks like they were marshmallow boxes, then put them on her shoulders to carry them into the house with considerable ease. Belle kept her house with curtains closed all the time, and was seen digging holes in her pig pen by some farmers who passed by at night. Neighbors also noticed that Belle began spending an unusual amount of time in the pig pens during the night. What they didn't know was that Belle had discovered the pig's most useful characteristic. They consumed everything, including human bones and teeth, leaving no identifiable traces. One of the first to respond to the advertisements was Henry Gerholt, a Wisconsin farmer who had sold his property. Belle corresponded with him for several months, gradually building an intensive epistolary relationship. Henry arrived at the farm in May 1906, carrying $3,000 in cash. He wrote to his family describing the farm as the most beautiful place I've ever seen and requesting they send potato seeds. This was the last communication his family received from him. John Moe, a Minnesota farmer, arrived at the farm in 1906. After months of romantic correspondence, he brought $1,000 in cash and elaborate plans to expand agricultural operations. Neighbors saw him arriving with a wagon loaded with belongings, but never saw him leave. Ole Budsberg, a wealthy Wisconsin's widower, was one of the most lucrative victims. He had sold his farm for a substantial amount and arrived at Belle's property in April 1907. The last time he was seen was on April 6, 1907, at the LaPorte Savings Bank when he was mortgaging his Wisconsin lands, signing a deed, and obtaining thousands of dollars in cash. His adult sons, Oscar and Matthew, did not know about his marriage plans and only discovered his disappearance weeks later. Thomas Linbow, who had left Chicago in 1905 to work for Belle, was also found among the victims. Another suitor, who had brought about $1,000 to Belle, was identified through a watch found with the remains. Among other victims who disappeared were William Mingai, Herman Konitzer, Charles Edmund, and George Berry. Additionally, an Iowa farmer named Chris Hill, who sold his farm and went to LaPorte in 1906, also disappeared. Only one man claimed to have responded to Belle's personal advertisement and lived to tell the story. George Anderson claimed to have traveled from Missouri to Indiana to meet her. They dined together, during which she admitted having difficulties making her mortgage payments. George offered to pay the mortgage if they married, but this apparently was not enough. She wanted the money in advance. That night, George said he woke up to discover Belle standing above his bed, her face illuminated only by a candle. Believing the terrifying face staring at him was full of murderous intent, George screamed, at which point Belle left the room. He packed his bags and went straight to the train station to return to Missouri. Belle had become incredibly efficient in her criminal operation. She processed one victim per month on average, generating income that significantly exceeded legitimate farmers' earnings. Each murder yielded between $1,000 and $5,000. Her preferred method of murder was poisoning with strychnine mixed in coffee or food. The strychnine caused violent convulsions that quickly incapacitated victims, but Belle discovered she could control the dosage to prolong agony if desired. During these prolonged deaths, she would hum softly while writing romantic letters to her next victims, a level of psychological coldness that defied comprehension. For particularly robust or suspicious victims, Belle used chloroform to incapacitate them before using a meat cleaver for fatal blows to the head. She had learned to weigh body parts like a professional butcher, ensuring efficient processing and disposal. The dismemberment process followed the techniques she had learned from Belle Gunness. First, she completely drained blood from the body to prevent deterioration and facilitate handling. Then she separated the head at the neck, arms at the shoulders, and legs at the knees. Each part was wrapped in burlap sacks and treated with quicklime to accelerate decomposition. Belle discovered that pigs consumed bones, meat, and even human teeth without leaving identifiable traces. She had learned that pigs eat literally anything, a discovery that transformed the pig pen into an efficient method of evidence elimination. When she was tired or in a hurry, she simply chopped up the bodies and fed them to the pigs, which consumed everything without leaving traces. But Belle's operation was becoming increasingly risky. The number of missing men was drawing attention, and families were beginning to ask more insistent questions. The solution would come in the form of Andrew Helgeline, a South Dakota farmer who would become both her last victim and the catalyst for her downfall. Andrew Helgeline was different from Belle's other suitors. A prosperous farmer from Aberdeen, South Dakota, he possessed not only substantial wealth but also a protective brother named Assel, who maintained regular contact with him. This difference would prove fatal to Belle's operation. The correspondence between Belle and Andrew lasted 18 months, longer than she normally invested in her victims. Andrew was cautious by nature and asked detailed questions about the farm, Belle's finances, and their plans for the future. In one of her most elaborate letters, Belle wrote, "To the dearest friend in the world, no woman in the world is happier than I. I know you will come to me to be mine. I can tell from your letters that you are the man I want. It doesn't take long to know when we like a person, and I like you more than anyone in the world. Think of how we will enjoy each other's company. You, the sweetest man in the whole world. We will be completely alone with each other. Can you conceive of anything more pleasant? I think of you constantly. When I hear your name mentioned, and that's when one of the dear children speaks of you, or I hear myself humming with the words of an old love song. It's beautiful music to my ears. My heart beats in wild ecstasy for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Andrew finally arrived at the farm in January 1908, bringing with him $2,900 in cash, his life savings. Belle received him with elaborate hospitality, preparing sumptuous meals and demonstrating the loving attention she had promised in her letters. Belle convinced Andrew to accompany her to the First National Bank of Laporte to deposit his money for safety. At the bank, she insisted he withdraw the entire balance in cash, claiming they needed the money for immediate farm investments. Andrew, blinded by love and trust, followed her instructions. He withdrew the $2,900 in cash and handed it all to Belle for joint investment. The next day, Andrew Helgeline disappeared forever. Belle deposited $500 in one account and $700 in another, using the rest to pay debts and make purchases. She had executed another perfect murder, or so she thought. But Asla Helgeline was not like the families of previous victims. When Andrew stopped responding to his letters, Asla immediately became suspicious. He knew his brother too well to believe. Andrew would simply stop communicating. Al wrote to Belle demanding information about his brother. Belle responded with her standard story. Andrew had received money and left for Norway to visit relatives. But Asla did not accept this explanation. He continued pressing, threatening to come personally to Laporte to search for Andrew. Belle responded that if he wanted to go to Laporte to search for his brother, she would help him, but also said that if he wanted her to be effectively involved in this search, he would have to pay her a very good amount. Belle realized she was facing a different threat than anything she had encountered before. Asla was persistent, intelligent, and had resources to conduct a real investigation. She needed an immediate exit strategy. Belle's solution was characteristically dramatic and violent. She decided to stage her own death, eliminating all evidence and escaping with her accumulated fortune. But first, she needed to eliminate potential witnesses, including her own children. In April 1908, Belle began preparations for her final plan. She went to a lawyer to make a will, saying she feared for her life and her children's lives due to threats from Ray Lamphere. She bought large quantities of kerosene and chloroform. More sinisterly, she bought candy and a toy train for her children. Farewell. Gifts for children she planned to murder. Belle also lured a woman from Chicago to the farm under the pretext of hiring her as a governess. The woman, whose name was never discovered, was approximately the same age as Belle, although significantly smaller in stature and weight. What made Belle's final plan particularly chilling was her meticulous preparation. She had practiced the fire scenario multiple times, setting small accidental fires around the property to test burn patterns and response times. She planted false evidence about fleeing to Canada, leaving misleading clues for investigators to find. On the night of April 27, 1908, Belle executed her final plan. First, she drugged her 3 children, Myrtle, Lucy, and Philip, with chloroform, ensuring they died peacefully in their sleep. Then she murdered the governess and decapitated the body to prevent positive identification. Belle dressed the woman's corpse in her own clothes and placed her jewelry on the body's fingers. She even pulled out some of her own teeth to plant in the ruins, creating false dental evidence. Ray Lamphere was involved in the plan, although the degree of his participation remains controversial. According to his later confession, Belle had promised they would flee together after the fire. But Belle had other plans. She intended to eliminate Ray as well to ensure no witnesses survived. In the early morning of April 28, 1908, at 4 a.m., Belle Gunness's house was consumed by intense flames that could be seen for miles. Joe Maxson, the new farm employee who had replaced Ray, woke up to the smell of smoke in his second-floor room. He shouted the names of Belle and the children, but got no response. With the house already engulfed in flames, Joe was forced to jump from his room window, escaping only in his underwear and surviving by very little. Neighbors arrived quickly at the scene. Mike Clifford and William Humphrey, who had seen the flames before dawn, desperately tried to wake whoever was inside the house, throwing bricks at windows and shouting, but no one responded. When the county sheriff arrived with volunteers and firefighting equipment, he found 4 bodies in the ruins. 3 were clearly children, found in their beds as if they had died in their sleep. The 4th body was an adult woman, but it presented a disturbing characteristic that immediately raised questions. It was decapitated. The absence of the head was not the only suspicious detail. When authorities measured the body, they discovered the woman was at most 5'7" tall and weighed approximately 154 lbs, significantly smaller than Belle, who measured 6 feet tall and weighed 200 lbs. Neighbors who knew Belle intimately immediately declared that was not her body. 2 friends of Belle, who traveled from Chicago to identify the body, confirmed the neighbors' suspicions. Dressmakers who provided clothes for Belle tested their pieces on the body and confirmed they were too large. A doctor who examined the internal organs found lethal doses of strychnine in both the woman's body and the children's bodies, indicating all had been poisoned before the fire. Ray Lamphere was immediately arrested as the main suspect. He had been seen in the area on the night of the fire, and witnesses reported suspicious behavior. More incriminating still, Ray was wearing John Moe's overcoat and Henry Gerholt's watch, items belonging to Belle's previous victims, but it was Assel Helgelein who transformed what seemed to be a case of arson into one of the most shocking discoveries in American criminal history. Arriving in La Porte after reading about the fire in newspapers, Assel insisted on searching for evidence of his brother's whereabouts. Initially, authorities resisted Assel's requests to excavate the property. The case seemed solved. Belle and her children had died in the fire, and Ray would be tried for the crime. But Assel was persistent and finally convinced the sheriff to allow a limited search. On May 3, 1908, Assel, Joe Maxson, and other workers began excavating suspicious depressions in the pig pen. What they found in the first hours of excavation shocked even experienced investigators: a burlap sack containing 2 hands, 2 feet, and a human head. Despite advanced decomposition and quicklime that had been applied to the face and stuffed in the ears to accelerate deterioration, Assel immediately recognized his brother Andrew's remains. The discovery completely transformed the perception of the case. Belle was not a victim, but a mass murderer. Looking around the property with new eyes, investigators realized that what they had assumed were natural depressions in the soil were actually dozens of shallow graves. The entire farm was a clandestine cemetery. In the following days, the excavation revealed a chamber of horrors that exceeded the worst expectations. On the first day, 5 complete bodies were found. On the second day, 6 more. Investigators stopped counting when the number of victims became overwhelming, reaching at least 11 bodies. Most bodies had been dismembered with surgical precision, heads separated at the neck, arms removed at the shoulders, legs cut at the knees, each body processed with the efficiency of a professional butcher. Many skulls showed evidence of blunt trauma, indicating victims had been beaten to death before dismemberment. Authorities found burlap sacks containing torsos, hands, arms cut from the shoulders down. They found human bones wrapped in loose flesh that dripped like gelatin. Many of the skulls had blunt trauma and cuts and were found separated from the bodies. The most disturbing discovery came when investigators examined the pigs themselves. Autopsies revealed human teeth in the animals, stomachs, definitive proof that Belle had been feeding human remains to her livestock. The pigs had become unwitting accomplices in her crimes, consuming evidence that would have otherwise led to her capture years earlier. On May 9th, 2 more packages of bones, decomposing flesh, and clothes were found in her private cemetery, but they could not identify the bodies found in the private cemetery at that time. On May 14th, some bones from another victim were found in the basement ashes, and others in shallow graves under the original pig pen. They also found more bones, near an outhouse and close to the lake. The bones had been crushed at the ends as if they had been hit with a hammer after dismemberment, and quicklime had been scattered over the faces and stuffed in the ears. Investigators also discovered hair of different colors scattered throughout the graves, evidence of multiple unidentified victims whose stories would never be known. The constant smell of quicklime that neighbors had complained about for years suddenly made horrifying sense. On May 12th, the surgical instruments with which the bodies were probably dismembered were found in the ashes. Among them were torture devices that indicated Belle had prolonged her victim's suffering to extract information about hidden money. Among the identified bodies were Jenny Olson, the adopted daughter who had gone to school in California, Ole Budsberg, the wealthy Wisconsin widower Thomas Lindboe, and several other men who had responded to Belle's matrimonial advertisements. Many bodies were so decomposed that identification was impossible, but personal belongings found in the graves confirmed the identity of several victims. The discovery of the bodies transformed Belle's farm into a macabre tourist attraction. An estimated 20,000 spectators traveled to La Porte to see the excavations. Street vendors sold popcorn, ice cream, and even Gunness stew, a tasteless reference to the fact that Belle had literally processed her victims like animals. Press coverage was sensationalist even by the era's standards. Newspapers referred to Belle as Hell's Belle, the Indiana Ogress, Lady Bluebeard, and the Black Widow. The farm was described as the Terror Farm and the Garden of Death. Ray's trial began in November 1908 and revealed even more disturbing details about Belle's operation. Witnesses described the constant flow of men arriving at the farm and never leaving. Others reported seeing Belle digging in the pig pen during the night and the strange smell that sometimes emanated from the property. Ray's defense brought evidence questioning the identification of the body found in the house. A local jeweler testified that although the gold from the dental bridge had survived the fire's heat should have melted the gold coating of other objects, but the dental bridge was too intact to be authentic. Even more damning, Joe Maxson and another worker testified having seen Louis Schultz, the sifter hired to search for evidence in the debris, take the dental bridge from his pocket and plant it in the wreckage shortly before its discovery. This revelation suggested that the dental evidence used to identify Belle had been fabricated. Ray was found guilty of arson, but acquitted of murder charges. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison but died of tuberculosis in December 1909, just 1 year after his conviction. Shortly before his death, Ray made 2 distinct confessions. The first was public, but the second was made to Reverend Edwin, Shell of the LaPorte Methodist Church. This secret confession was later revealed by a Chicago journalist named Edward Beckley, who had received a secret mission to gain access to the confession and publish it. The confession revealed that Ray had discovered Belle murdering male visitors by accident. He had gone to fix a hole in the house wall, and through the hole witnessed Belle beating a man to death. Once aware of the secret, he helped Belle eliminate the bodies, although he claimed not to have participated directly in the murders. Ray described how Belle had perfected an efficient system to attract, murder, and eliminate victims. She treated suitors with elaborate hospitality, making them feel completely at ease before attacking. Her preferred method was drugging victims' food or drink, then using chloroform to keep them unconscious while torturing them to obtain information about hidden money. The confession also revealed the involvement of Elizabeth Smith, a woman Ray claimed helped start the fire. According to Ray, he and Elizabeth, both quite drunk, went looking for money in the house, and Elizabeth was the one who started the fire after they failed to find more than $50. Elizabeth was arrested after Ray's confession was published, but no charges were formalized due to lack of evidence beyond Ray's secondhand testimony. Ray claimed that Belle had murdered the Chicago governess, decapitated the body, and planted false evidence to simulate her own death. He said Belle had planned for them to flee together, but at the last moment she changed plans and disappeared alone, leaving him to face the consequences. According to Ray, Belle had killed at least 42 people during her criminal career, accumulating a fortune of more than $250,000, an astronomical amount for the time. Local banks confirmed that Belle had withdrawn large amounts of cash in the weeks before the fire, leaving only small amounts in her account. On May 29, 1908, an auction was held on the property to sell objects that survived the fire. Buyers offered values far above what the objects were actually worth to acquire them. For example, a shovel worth 60 cents was sold for $14. A single person bought the dog, the pony, the wagon, plus the barn cat and her kittens. The true identity of the woman found in Belle's house ruins was never definitively established. She remains as one of the unidentified victims of one of the most elaborate crimes in American history. For decades after the fire, LaPorte police received about 2 reports per month from the people who had supposedly seen Belle somewhere. She was allegedly seen in Chicago, San Francisco, New York, and Los Angeles. In 1931, a woman named Esther Carlson was arrested in Los Angeles for poisoning August Lindstrom, a Norwegian immigrant, with the objective of stealing his money. 2 people who knew Belle identified Carlson as being her through photographs, but Carlson died in prison before official identification could be made. Strangely, this woman had with her some photos of children who looked very much like Belle's children. In 2007, almost a century after the crimes, the headless body was exhumed by a team of forensic anthropologists from the University of Indianapolis. They hoped to use modern DNA to finally solve the mystery of the woman's identity. The team tried to extract DNA from an envelope that Belle had licked to seal a letter sent to one of her victims, but the DNA was too degraded for conclusive analysis. The exhumation revealed that the original investigation had been even more incompetent than thought. Mixed with the adult woman's bones were bones from 2 children, indicating that parts of the bodies had been collected and buried randomly by the original investigator. The estimated height of the body was also revised during the 2007 exhumation. Instead of the originally reported 5 cm, the new anthropological analysis suggested the woman was between 5'5" and 5'9", making it technically possible that it was Belle, although still significantly shorter than her known height of 6 feet. In 2008, additional DNA tests were performed on the headless body in an attempt to compare DNA with a sample from a letter Belle had sent to one of her victims. But due to the sample's age, The tests could not be performed adequately, but circumstantial evidence continues pointing to the conclusion that Belle staged her own death and escaped justice. Her demonstrated intelligence, substantial financial resources, and meticulous planning make it unlikely she would have died accidentally in the fire she herself orchestrated. Today, the LaPorte County Historical Society Museum maintains a permanent exhibition about Belle Gunness. The farm where Belle committed her crimes is private property, but the site continues attracting curious visitors and researchers interested in the dark history. After the crimes came to light, the farm became a massive tourist attraction, with spectators coming from all over the country to see the mass graves. Concessions and souvenirs were sold on site, transforming the horror scene into a macabre commercial spectacle. Belle Gunness became the subject of at least 2 American musical ballads, multiple books, and films. She was referenced as a female. Bluebeard, a reference to the French folktale about a nobleman who married 6 women who mysteriously disappeared afterward. Belle's story also inspired urban legends and local folklore. LaPorte residents reported ghostly sightings on the former property, and Belle's figure became part of American criminal mythology as an extreme example of how greed can completely corrupt the human soul. Belle Gunness represents a particularly disturbing type of criminal, someone who transformed murder into a lucrative and efficient business. She did not kill out of passion, anger, or psychological compulsion, but for pure financial gain. Each death was calculated to maximize profit and minimize detection risk. Her criminal operation was possible due to law enforcement limitations in the early 20th century. There was no efficient communication between jurisdictions, primitive forensic methods, and a social tendency not to question respectable women. Belle exploited these systematic weaknesses to create a killing machine that operated for more than 2 decades. The case also reveals dark aspects of the American dream. Belle had come to America seeking opportunities, but transformed this search into systematic predation of other immigrants who shared the same dreams. She used Nordic community solidarity and the vulnerability of lonely men as tools for her crimes. Belle's tremendous physical strength, her ability to carry a 300 lb piano alone or 100 lb pigs under each arm, was not just a curiosity, but an essential tool in her crimes. This strength allowed her to handle heavy bodies without help, move evidence quickly, and intimidate potential witnesses. Her discovery that pigs eat literally anything, including human bones and teeth, transformed what should have been a common farm into a perfect biological crematorium. This macabre revelation demonstrates how Belle adapted practical discoveries for sinister purposes. If Belle really escaped, she would have lived the rest of her life knowing she had cheated justice and profited from the murder of dozens of innocent people. With more than $250,000 in her possession, equivalent to millions today, she could have lived comfortably anywhere in the world, always looking over her shoulder. If she died in the fire, she took with her the secrets of how many lives she really took, where she hid her accumulated fortune, and details of crimes that may never be discovered. The 120-acre farm may still guard buried secrets that were never found. What remains incontestable is that Belle Gunness created one of the most elaborate and successful criminal schemes in American history. She transformed her isolated farm into a human slaughterhouse, using superficial charm and promises of love to lure victims to a horrible death. Her ability to maintain multiple identities, the grieving widow, the prosperous farmer, the romantic woman, the cold killer, demonstrates a level of psychological manipulation that rivals the worst sociopaths in history. Belle not only killed her victims, she seduced them, made them fall in love, and then eliminated them with the same coldness with which she processed animal carcasses. The Black Widow of LaPorte remains as a dark reminder that evil can hide behind the most convincing masks, and that the unbridled pursuit of wealth can lead to the most unimaginable crimes. Her story continues to haunt not only LaPorte, Indiana, but the American collective consciousness as one of the most disturbing chapters in our criminal history. Belle Gunness may have died more than a century ago, but her legacy of terror and mystery lives on. She remains as a symbol of how intelligence, when divorced from morality, can create monsters that exceed our capacity for understanding. The mystery of her final death or escape serves as a perfect metaphor for her entire life. Always one step ahead of her pursuers, always hiding the truth behind layers of deception and manipulation. Even in death, Belle managed to maintain control of the narrative, leaving us with more questions than answers. Perhaps it is appropriate that a woman who lived an entire life of lies and deceptions left as her final legacy the greatest mystery of all. Whether she really paid for her crimes or managed to escape to live her final years in freedom, carrying with her the secrets of one of the most successful criminal operations in American history. Thank you for following this disturbing investigation. What do you think? Did Belle die in the fire or manage to escape? Leave your theories in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more Fear Files investigations.